If you would like to listen to or download any or all of Power at Work's blogcasts in podcast form, they are available for streaming and download on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Overcast. Just search Power at Work on any podcast platform and enjoy all of Power at Work's podcasts. While you're there, two things we would like you to do. First, subscribe, and that way you won't miss any Power at Work podcasts. Second, please give Power at Work a 5-star rating, a like, a love, whatever is the tool that your podcast provider gives you. It helps others who care about workers and worker power to find Power at Work's content. They will be grateful, and so will we. Well, hello, powerful people, and welcome back to the Power Half Hour live on LinkedIn and published for posterity on poweratwork.us. I'm Seth Harris from the Burns Center for Social Change. The Power Half Hour brings you more voices, more news, and more worker power insights in just 30 minutes. I've got an expert panel of 3 guests who I'll introduce to you in just a minute. Our video audience, our live video audience, and our video audience on poweratwork.us can see them, but they can't speak until I introduce them, which gives me all power until I make the introductions. The panelists are going to talk about the big stories and the biggest developments affecting worker power, workers, and unions, and they're going to talk about important worker developments to come in the next few months, years, hopefully not longer than that, sometime in our near-term future. And then at the very end of the show, we're going to offer our guests a tiny little gift, a really, truly inadequate thank you for the service that they're doing for you today, and that is we will have shameless plugs and shout outs. They can promote whatever or whoever they would like. And self-promotion is enthusiastically encouraged. And then if you're hungry for more, and why wouldn't you be, stay with us for Power Half Hour overtime. We'll take questions and comments from our live audience and respond to comments and questions that came to us by email from the Power at Work community. And I can tell you we do have a few of those. So that's going to happen during overtime in about 28 minutes. Now, before I introduce you to the people who are going to make you smarter, audience, stay up to date with the Power Half Hour by following the Power at Work page on LinkedIn and by subscribing to Power at Work at poweratwork.us. Go to poweratwork.us, fill in the subscription form right on the front page. There should be a box that pops up. If not, go down to the beginning of the bottom of the front page. You'll see it there. Give us your name, your email address. We promise we won't sell or give away your information, and it's all free. All right, now let's meet our panel. From Sin City, Las Vegas, Nevada, he's the Ralph Denton Professor of Law and Director of the Workplace Law Program at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, William S. Boyd School of Law. Boy, that's a long introduction, Ruben. It's Ruben Garcia. Hello again, Professor.
Good to see you, Seth. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And from the Big Easy, New Orleans, Louisiana, where, let me just say, my niece Maya is recovering from a car accident. She lives in New Orleans with her sister Leah. So shout out to my cousin Maya. Looking forward to seeing you on your feet again really soon. But he did not have a car accident. He's a professor, at least as far as I know. You can share with us if you'd like, Ali. He's a professor of economics at the University of New Orleans and a longtime labor policy expert. It's our friend, Dr. Ali Bustamante. Hey, Ali.
Nice to see you again, and no car crashes to report.
That's very good news. I can only deal with one in my life at a time, so please. And from the happiest place on earth, unless you're a public sector trade unionist, Orlando, Florida. She's a reporter covering labor and politics for the Orlando Weekly, another returning guest and a favorite of Power Half Hour. It's McKenna Schueler. Hello, McKenna.
Hi, thanks for having me.
No, delighted to have you back. Thank you for saying yes. All right. Topic number 1, panel. I'm going to start with you, Ali, on this one. We're going to look over our shoulder. We're going to look in a rearview mirror, and you're going to tell us what is the most important or the most interesting development or the biggest news story relating to unions, worker power, or worker collective action over the last couple of weeks. All right, Ali, go ahead.
Well, I want to talk about the jobs report that just came out earlier this month. We've all known that we have a sluggish economy now going on for over a year now or so. And the latest jobs report gave people a reason to feel a little bit hopeful. But once you get past the headline numbers, the report is really much less encouraging, and it actually suggests the labor market is actually continuing its weakening trend and not actually strengthening, I think, as some folks had actually hoped so. On the surface, the March jobs report looked kind of solid. The economy added 178,000 jobs, and the unemployment rate actually went down a little bit from 4.3% to 4.4%. But the real issue is that that drop in unemployment did not happen because labor demand suddenly accelerated. It actually happened mainly because people left the labor force. And the reason why payrolls actually rose last month is that the average work week got a little bit shorter. That means more Americans are working fewer hours, which is often a sign that full-time job opportunities are becoming harder to find, and some workers are leaving. So what we actually ultimately have is that some workers are leaving the labor force altogether, while others are settling for part-time jobs, while, after waiting for full-time jobs that really never came. If you were to zoom out a little bit, over the past 15 months, the picture actually looks worse. Job growth, which has been driven almost entirely by healthcare over the past year, has actually stalled a bit. When you look at, going back to January 2025, the U.S. economy added about 369,000 jobs overall. But once you remove the healthcare jobs, the rest of the economy actually lost for 127,000 jobs. So in other words, the main source of labor demand right now is that structural shift that comes with an aging population, and not anything near like broad-based investment in production or any kind of economic optimism. So for workers, that's really the real issue right now. The question isn't whether the economy managed one decent headline number in March. It's really, for them, what matters most is whether workers have any leverage, right? And what we see right now with the main details within last month's report is that it suggests that leverage is continuing to thin right now for a lot of workers. Fewer hours, slower wage growth, lower labor force participation. All of this really points to a labor market in which workers are losing bargaining power. And this is why this jobs report should be read really as a warning sign, not as a victory lap. That I think a lot of folks may not have necessarily had the time to really look into it for what it actually is.
Yeah, okay, so since you opened the door, I got to ask you this question. And there is even further beneath the data, there is a very seriously troubling trend, and I want to see if you agree with me that it's troubling. It appears that the number of new jobs that we need in order to sort of break even, meaning to employ everybody who's entering the labor market in a month, or on average in a month, that we really don't need many jobs. And some economists, labor economists like yourself, are saying we need no jobs. And that's because the supply of labor is not growing. As you said, people are leaving the labor force, but also President Trump is throwing lots and lots and lots and lots of terrific workers out of the country with his immigration policy. Am I right that that's an incredibly bad sign for our economy? Because how do you grow an economy if you have sort of a fixed or shrinking number of people working in the economy?
No, you're absolutely right about that. When we think about just like economic potential, right, we always kind of have this like pretty soft figure of like what would an economy that is running on all cylinders look like. And when you start losing people, that outlook actually shifts in, which means that even if we were to shoot, on all cylinders and have everybody employed who wants to be employed, if you just have a smaller population, that just means less growth overall. So you're absolutely right. The supply issue is a considerable one right now. But I would just say that for what we've been seeing for the past 15 months or so, it's really the demand side that is really putting pressure on this, this diminishing bargaining power for a lot of workers.
Good. Well, so that was evidence of me pouring salt in a wound. I'll try not to do that too many times during the show. All right, McKenna, looking backwards, what's the most important, most noteworthy story of the last couple of weeks affecting workers, unions, and worker power?
Right. So I mentioned this before we started recording, but I believe one of your previous guests, Ann LaFaso, touched on this last episode. But I wanted to provide a little bit more context and information about this new anti-union bill that passed in Florida, soon to be signed into law. Just from observing the legislative process that I think could be pertinent to a national audience. So specifically as it concerns some of the actors involved in pushing this behind the scenes. And just for background, this is a pretty extensive bill, but the most significant changes it makes is really just kind of a change in union election rules for the public sector, with the usual carve-outs for police officers, firefighters, and correctional officers, unions that conventionally endorse Republicans for office. And listeners might recall that Florida passed another pretty big union bill in 2023 that, among other things, banned payroll dues deductions for the public sector and required that these unions go through annual recertification elections if their dues-paying membership is below 60% of the bargaining unit. So under this new bill that passed, any new election going forward, whether it's forming a union, recertification, or decertifying a union, will require a simple majority vote of at least 50% of the bargaining unit, instead of just a simple majority of those who vote. So for example, if there's a bargaining unit of 100 workers, at least 26 must vote in favor of forming a union, recertifying, or decertifying. And what's important there that I don't think was touched on in the previous conversation with Power Half Hour is that this is actually a watered down version of the original proposal that was backed by these anti-union think tanks such as the Freedom Foundation, based out of Washington State, and the McKenna Center for Public Policy. So I frame it more as this bill was a win for those anti-union think tanks, but it was also something of a loss too, because they didn't really fully get what they wanted. And the version that lawmakers did eventually pass will be easier, if not easy, for unions to comply with. And that watering down was only made possible because of these Republican senators who had a problem with the bill, because Republicans do control a supermajority of the Florida legislature. And I've obtained public records over the years, specifically emails and draft language that came from these lobbyists for groups like the Freedom Foundation directly to the lawmakers and their legislative aides, that demonstrate that this bill wasn't born in Florida, but was several years in the making. And it also was a bill that wasn't expected to pass. So the Florida AFL-CIO has now openly admitted that they were assured by State House and Senate leadership that this would not pass this year. But that was before the Freedom Foundation lobbied hard on this, and they leveraged their allies with the U.S. Department of Education, the State Department of Education, the Heritage Foundation, and then Governor Ron DeSantis, who very late in the game made this a legislative priority, despite it having such a low profile during most of the 60-day session.
So can I just ask you about? I'm dying to know. I'm sorry to cut you off, but do you think that this bill or this set of anti-labor actions that the legislature and Governor DeSantis is also an important voice in trying to bust unions in the state, is this going to be an election issue in the governor's race?
I don't know if it will be. I think it should be, but I don't think I've seen any, because there is a gubernatorial race this year. Ron DeSantis is going out the door, but I don't think I've really seen any candidate in the race really talk about unions, besides there is one Republican candidate who has some interesting economic policies, but he's kind of a long shot candidate. So I don't know if this is going to have much of a voice in the gubernatorial race.
Very, very interesting. All right, Ruben, looking backwards, last few weeks, biggest union, worker power, worker story.
Thank you. Well, as your correspondent in Nevada, I have to focus on one of our labor issues here, and that is the unionization of brothels in places in Nevada where it's legal. And just in case your listeners might be under the impression that prostitution is legal in Las Vegas or Reno, that's actually not the case, even though you'd be shocked to find out that it happens there. But in any event, we have the rest of the state where brothels are legal. And one of the brothels, Sherry's Ranch, recently filed a petition for representation in the NLRB. So their issues, of course, are going to be about safety and sort of negotiation of fees, also intellectual property, the right to control AI images of themselves and everything in the, on the internet. So they, like many other unions, are concerned about the technology and where that's going. And they, of course, have this constant issue that a lot of workers have as to their employer classifying them as independent contractors and not employees, and the question of whether they're eligible to unionize at all. So that is, at least one example in the adult entertainment industry. There, of course, there's a long history in other parts of the industry, like in exotic dance, workers who are unionizing or unionized in the San Francisco Bay Area, or many wage and hour actions where workers in exotic dance clubs were misclassified as independent contractors and were actually employees and won back pay and attorney's fees and all kinds of penalties against employers who knowingly misclassified them and failed to pay them wages under the Fair Labor Standards Act and state laws. So I'll be watching that definitely in terms of how the petition goes in this NLRB, what kind of things happen. But the question, of course, is not going to go away in terms of technology, as we know, and intellectual property of workers out on the internet. So that's what I've been watching the last few weeks.
So I have two questions for you. First of all, how big is this industry? Is this like a one-off thing where there happens to be a union supporter who involved? I believe the communications workers are the union who's organizing that brothel. Or is there like a movement among hundreds or thousands of workers in Nevada who are going to organize? That's my first question. My second question for you really quickly is, what is the argument that these workers are independent contractors? I mean, they're operating in an employer's space. Presumably, the employer provides whatever are the surfaces on which their activities engaged. Let me just try and be as euphemistic as possible here. I can't even guess what the argument is that they're independent contractors.
Well, in the first, I think that once again these shops are fairly small, in the grand scheme of things. So I don't know. I think if there's going to be a petition or an election at any of these places, they're not going to be a large number of workers. I would say maybe in the I think in the tens or 20s of workers who are actually there. And of course these are rural areas, and so in order to work there, you have to sort of travel and everything. So they're sort of spread out. But the second answer is like in other parts of the adult entertainment industry, the idea of celebrityhood, seems to make someone an independent contractor. If you have some sort of like following on social media, if you have some appearances at some clubs or anything like that, all of a sudden you are you're a celebrity, not an employee, not a worker. So that is, I think, the argument that's generally, and many people may connect those two things and say, well, of course the celebrities aren't, employees. Well, look at the Actors Guild and all kinds of other performer guilds, and you see, of course, celebrities are union members and employees under the control of an employer. And I think again, it is a good question as to how. I guess the other way this comes up is that whatever tips employees work, that's also been a long time kind of dodge in terms of being an employee for the employer. It's like if you make tips, then you must be an independent contractor. That again has failed in numerous cases, and so I don't know again what the board is going to do with it. But of course, there's always the minimum wage and overtime. Litigation possibility that may actually set some precedent in this area.
Yeah, well, let me just say, thank God those tips are not taxed anymore. I mean, that's going to make all the difference economically for those workers. Okay, I'm just going to quickly throw in a couple of things, just to sort of updates from past comments that I made. First of all, the public employee collective bargaining law in Virginia that I pointed to, which I think is absolutely critically important to getting continued growth in the labor movement. Governor Spanberger has now sent that back to the legislature, not with a veto. She has said she is enthusiastically in support of it. She has some amendments toward the bill that's permissible in the Virginia system, I think all of her amendments have to do with the local angle on collective bargaining, and particularly with respect to budgetary consequences. But I think there's reason to believe that bill, as well as a paid sick leave bill and a paid family and medical leave bill, are going to become law in Virginia this year, which will be an extremely important development. Also, I don't want to let the announcement go by that Senator Bernie Sanders and American Association of Flight Attendants President Sarah Nelson have announced a new organization called Union Now. By the way, that's unionnow.org. There's a unionnow.com, which is a union benefits organization, which is entirely different. Union Now is going to raise money to support workers in organizing. A shout out to Hamilton Nolan, who wrote a book that was published in 2024, and we were lucky enough to be able to interview him on Power at Work, where he had talked with Sarah about starting this organization, and now it is actually off the ground. They had their kickoff event in the last couple of days in New York City with Mayor Mamdani participating. Interesting. It'll be worth seeing whether or not that can be an effective organizing mechanism, financial organizing mechanism to support workers who are organizing or striking. All right, let's move on to topic number 2. Guests, get out your crystal balls. We're going to look into the future. We're not looking at 2093. We're looking at the next few weeks, the next few months, the next few years. What will be the most important story or development or innovation or event affecting workers, worker power, and unions in the near-term future? McKenna.
So this should definitely be a story. I'm not sure if it will end up necessarily being one, but as far as events, I track the union avoidance industry fairly closely for a Substack newsletter I put together on the industry's activity in Florida. And I was informed that a group called the CUE, formerly known as the Council for a Union-Free Environment, is holding its annual spring conference in Tampa, Florida next week, which is just a couple of hours away from me. And it's significant because my understanding is that it's historically been a pretty big gathering of business representatives and consultants in this union avoidance industry who are generally paid upwards of $200 to $400 an hour to persuade workers against forming a union. Investigative reporter Lee Fang, for instance, formerly of The Intercept, wrote this really interesting and revealing inside view of the conference back in 2022. And how the union avoidance industry was pivoting to a focus on positive employee relations and using diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives to prevent unionization among more diverse workforces and to keep these workplaces union-free.
Hang on, wait a minute. Say that again. They're going to use DEI as a mechanism? Go ahead.
Yeah, so that's actually one of my questions as to how they would navigate that this year. And from the agenda that's posted publicly online, the conference will be hosting, various talks and workshops, including how to handle strike actions, and even a simulation of an organizing drive that will be hosted by a representative of Lululemon. Keynote speakers will also include Phil Wilson of the Labor Relations Institute, which is one of the most active union avoidance firms in the country. I personally looked into trying to get into this conference to try and learn more about the industry from the industry perspective, since I usually hear from labor about this. But the registration fee of nearly $1,700 is a little bit cost prohibitive, to say the least. But I did want to just say, if anybody plans to attend, any listeners, I'd love to get your insights after, or if anybody has a way of getting a reporter in for observation purposes, please feel free to let me know.
I think it's pretty unlikely that anybody who's watching the Power Half Hour is going to be going to that conference unless they're assault. I mean, let's not rule out the possibility that there's some spies that are going to be going in, but wow, that is really amazing. I think we should immediately notify the Trump administration that there's a group organizing to advance DEI in Tampa. See if ICE breaks up that meeting. I don't know if they will. Ruben, get out your crystal ball. Tell us what's coming down the pike.
Well, it's legislative season, at least in many states, not here in Nevada. We're in an off year in terms of the legislature. So I'm looking at other states and what's going on, particularly in wage and hour law, which I have a deep interest in. So I'm focused on Hawaii now, actually, in terms of their now $16 an hour minimum wage now in effect. And whether or not it's scheduled to go up to $18 an hour in 2028. and they're talking about accelerating that. They also have been looking at getting rid of the tip credit, and again, in the hospitality industry, which I am very interested in. There's a lot of concern about the tip credit and how it has discriminatory impacts and a sort of a racial legacy. So that movement again is in Hawaii to actually get rid of the tip credit, which works a little different there in terms of whether not $2.13 an hour, but sort of a little bit off the top if you're a tipped worker. Again, going back to the previous discussion about tax on tips, what is is that going to be helping anybody in this era of rising costs? So there's a lot of discussion about what will happen out of the Hawaii legislature that I've just been focused on, but it's all over the country. Other sort of models of strategic enforcement focused on particular industries like construction and hospitality and those kinds of like models from different states that I've been looking at. Or maybe implemented there. So I'm focused on that state, but also, of course, other legislative action on wages coming up.
That's a really good one. That's a really, really good one. Lots of activity going on at the state right now. As I was saying about Virginia, it's happening all over the country. All right, Ali, tell us what we can expect in the near-term future.
Yeah, I'm going to go back nationally, and really over the next few months, I'm really concerned whether, this weak labor market environment is hardening into a broader economic security crisis, really. Right now, that risk is very much real. With the Iran war, businesses have already become more hesitant to hire, and now they're operating in an environment of much higher energy prices, rising inflation pressure, and certainly growing uncertainty. And so just last week, Chicago Fed President Austin Goolsbee warned the war was creating the kind of stagflationary pressure that can slow growth while pushing prices higher, which again, if anybody's been around long enough, stagflation is not something we want to hear or we want to experience. And that's what really makes this moment so dangerous for workers. The labor market was already softening before this latest geopolitical shock. The latest job openings and labor turnover survey, or JOLTS, basically showed that job openings fell to the lowest level since March of 2020 last month. So in other words, employers are already pulling back before the economic fallout of this conflict had even begun. And so the danger is really whether we're moving forward with this low fire economy into something worse. To really kind of like put a pin on it, it's, what we're really trying to look at over the next few months is the cost side of the equation, whether that's going to get worse, right? We know that the conflict has pushed up energy prices and complicated the inflation outlook. But is that going to create now a squeeze on working families from both directions, right? A weak job market, and then having these higher cost of gas, transportations, and just, higher prices of everything. So, that's really what we're looking forward to, what I'm looking over the next few months, whether it's workers who, are not having their paychecks stretch as far as they have been, and whether, it's a question of not just whether they're going to have greater unemployment in the future, but whether that, squeeze is actually going to come from both directions with weak hiring and rising prices that is ultimately going to lead to a broader economic, downturn, which what always concerns me is the irreversible nature of like the economic scarring element, which is, years, months, maybe even years that of economic gains that folks would just never, ever get back.
Yeah, one of the critical considerations there is, do employers start laying off their workers? So far, employers have not been laying off workers in large numbers, and that's one of the reasons why the unemployment rate is not going up. Also, that we are flat when it comes to labor supply. That's a big part of it, as you were saying. That'll be a big, big issue. All right, we've arrived at everybody's favorite topic number 3. Shameless plugs and shout outs. Everybody gets 1 minute to promote anybody or anything they would like, including themselves. Ruben, I think you're going to start us out with talking about yourself, which is perfectly okay. What is your shameless plug or shout out?
I'm going to actually first shout out the Hawaii labor movement, which is the highest unionization rate in the country. But also, of course, embedded in that is a shameless plug. I'm moving to Hawaii to become the Leonard Hoshijo Endowed Chair in Labor Law at the University of Hawaii Law School. So that is why I'm focused on Hawaii, even my garb, although I have a lot of wardrobe to get, and I'm still far behind in terms of learning about Hawaii and how to be Hawaiian. But after 15 wonderful years in Nevada, it's time to make that change. So thanks.
Yeah. Congratulations. Very, very exciting. And I know I speak for everyone when I say we're looking forward to our invitations to speak at the school. Ali Bustamante, what's your shameless plug or shout out?
Yeah, I want to plug the UCLA Strategic Labor Research Conference that's happening on August 7th through 9th this summer. It's hosted by the UCLA Strategic Labor Research Lab, and I had the chance to attend and present at the conference last year for the first time. I'll be back again this summer. It's if you haven't checked it out already, it's a terrific opportunity to participate in workshops, training sessions. The focus is on learning, how to run more effective campaigns, which is, I think, something that we can all get behind of. But the other takeaway, I think it's just really a beautiful thing to be in community with a lot of your peers.
Absolutely. McKenna Schueler, what's your shameless plug or shout out?
Okay, I wanted to give a shout out to a group of about 70 public utility and wastewater workers employed by the city of Lake Worth Beach in South Florida who just voted to unanimously reform their union after a 2-year battle with the state. They were previously unionized with the IBEW, one of the locals down south, and had been for decades until their bargaining unit was decertified as a result of this 2023 anti-union law. So they spent 2 years reorganizing, contacting the International, and really just mobilizing each other to reform their union. And I had like a 60-year-old utility worker reach out to me about this a couple of years ago, and he's been in contact with me ever since, just telling me about these new developments and how difficult the state is making, this process. But they did it. They unanimously reformed their union, and hopefully will be on the way towards, getting a new agreement in place.
Very exciting and a very optimistic way to end. A great note on which to end. Audience, stick with us if you can. We're going to begin the Power Half Hours overtime in just a minute. For McKenna Schueler, Ruben Garcia, Ali Bustamante, and our producer, Ayush Kanvalkar, thank you for joining the Power Half Hour. Stick around for overtime, but for right now, class is dismissed. All right, guests, take a breath, take a sip of water. We're all going to just breathe a little bit, and we have some questions that will be coming in the chat in just a second from our Power at Work community, and I want to share them with you. Let me just say to the audience, if you have a question and you're in our live audience right now, just post the question on the Power at Work page on LinkedIn, and Yush will go over there and take a look, and he'll translate that to me. So if you have a question, live audience, go ahead and ask it. But at any time, anybody in the audience, whether you're watching this live or a recording, if you'd like to send us a question, please send it to us via email at poweratwork@theburnscenter.org. That's poweratwork@the center.org. Burnscenter.org. And we will save your question for our next group of folks. If you send it by email, we're not going to see it today, but we'll have it for our next group of panelists. And we will start the questions with those that we have received from our audience, our community. Okay. First one, this is close to home for me. I just read that Apple is closing its unionized store in Towson, Maryland. Is that kind of union busting allowed? Professor, you want to take a shot at that? Actually, law professor, you want to take a shot at that? Apple is, let me just say, I saw this news report as well. Apple, which never closes a store. I mean, almost never closes a store. I mean, maybe there's one that blew up and they had to close it to fix it. And now one of their few unionized stores in Towson, Maryland is being closed down, and our audience member wants to know, is that kind of union busting allowed?
Well, I've never been to that store, but if it's like the Apple store in Las Vegas, it's like there's no problem with people going there, including me, in terms of like getting stuff fixed and everything. So I think that it's going to be a big question in terms of what was going on there. it happens. It has happened in many other industries. Many other employers have done the same thing. The general rule is, that you can't do that if it's for an anti-union reason, and Apple's going to, I'm sure, come up with all kinds of data and trends and everything that show that the store is not profitable on its own. But again, I think it does it. I smell something right there in that particular story, and without knowing more about sort of what the case is going to look like, I can't say what it's ultimately going to turn out to be.
Yeah, it's a very hard. This is a hard kind of case to prove, because you have to prove that it was done. It was anti-union discrimination, right? Is essentially the way that you would go after this kind of thing. That it was intended to coerce the workers out of being union members, and also that it was discrimination. And so, if Apple can show that another store or a couple of other stores that were not union were closed, it just becomes very, very difficult. And as you said, there'll be lots of charts and graphs flying around, brought in by consultants whose job it is to avoid these becoming labor law violations. So, okay, does anybody want to?
Are there other stores that are unionized that are not being closed yet? Or
I believe there are, but there are not multiple. It's a small handful, if there's even that many. I'm not sure there are. This was the first in the country. I believe the machinists organized the Towson Apple store, and I think that they've had success in one or two other places, but don't hold me to that. I'm not absolutely certain. Audience, if you know, please jump in with a comment on LinkedIn. Okay, let me turn to another question. Okay, so McKenna, maybe you can jump in on this one. I don't know how closely you're following the Starbucks issues, but here's the question. Last week, Starbucks Workers United filed a charge with the NLRB alleging that Starbucks is negotiating in bad faith. This is from the audience member, not from me. What they say next is, I'm tempted to say, duh. But I didn't read that right, but that's probably what they had in mind. But instead of saying duh, I have two questions. First, why would any union file a charge with this NLRB? Second, am I right that this seems like a bad sign about the state of negotiations? Anybody want to take a run at that? McKenna, I pointed at you because I don't know how closely you're following Starbucks developments, but...
I haven't been following it super closely lately. I know that there's just been a lot of back and forth between negotiations are on, negotiations are off, and I can only imagine just kind of how that might feel for the workforce. But I probably can't say myself, whether it's a good sign or a bad sign or really kind of guess what the union strategy is there. But I can imagine anything that's going through the NLRB at this stage is probably going to be slow and probably just as frustrating as this bargaining process has probably been for the workers involved.
I think that's right. So, Ruben, maybe you want to jump in on the question of why would anyone file with this NLRB? What's good about filing with the NLRB?
I think many would argue that it's been this way well before this administration, that the effectiveness of refusal to bargain charges, in any administration has never been particularly fast or effective to actually get people to bargain if they're really bargaining in bad faith. So the fact is that it is, of course, going to take a while, and it is, a accepted sort of part of bargaining strategy. But really, I think that if this is, at least a strategy that will keep things going, or at least keep people sort of focused on the negotiations, then it might be effective in other areas. And I don't have any inside information at all in terms of the bargaining strategy or how it's going. But I think we knew it was going to take a long time, one way or another, in terms of actually getting something done with this huge corporation and these workers.
Yeah, Ali, do you want to jump in on this one?
Yeah, I'll just say, in terms of, what we've known for a very long time, as kind of Ruben mentioned, is that, the NLRB has not necessarily been this, great effective apparatus for worker power. That being said, it's one of the remaining tools that folks have there, available to them. And so use the tools you have, I suppose. But it's, what I think this really points to is our, bigger conversation with the labor movement as to, what are the tools that we need to put in place, the next, 2, 5, 10 years.
Yeah. The only thing that I would add into the comments, and I agree with everything everybody just said, but the staff of the NLRB, the career staff, the field examiners, the lawyers are still at work, and they're still doing their jobs, and they are still endeavoring to enforce the law. They have not been told stop enforcing the law. They have been told that some of the things that happened under the Biden administration we're not doing anymore, and we want to do things in a very different, less worker-friendly, less worker power-friendly way. But they're still doing their job, and they are still processing unfair labor practices, and they are still filing charges, and they are still overseeing elections and running elections, and they're doing as the best that they conceivably can. And so I want to distinguish what's happening at the political levels of the NLRB from the staff of the NLRB, who are diligent people committed to the mission of that organization, even if their hands are tied sometimes by the political leadership, meaning the general counsel and the board. I'd also like to point out there are surprises sometimes. So the board unanimously held that Amazon violated the act by refusing to bargain with the union, the Amazon labor union in Staten Island. Now, you don't have to be, Robert Wagner, sorry, dated reference. You don't have to be, Wilma Liebman or Jenna Bruzzo to know that that's a violation of the law. But they are ruling in the right way sometimes, where there just is no other way to come out, I guess. They are doing, I don't know if they're doing the right thing, they're doing the only thing that's available to them. I guess when there's only one path, you congratulate people for going down that path. I just, sort of as an aside, but related, there was a report today that there's unease in the organized business community, that there are only 3 members of the NLRB right now, and that, as far as I know, President Trump has not nominated a 4th member to join the NLRB. It would have to be confirmed by the United States Senate. And the reason that the business community is beginning to grumble, and they're doing it in the beginning of April, is to try to spur action. And the reason there's some deadline for that, although obviously the Republicans will control the Senate all the way through the end of the calendar year, even if they lose it in the elections in November. The concern that they have is that Dave Prouty, who was a Biden appointee, a Democrat, a former union attorney, his term on the NLRB runs out in mid-August. And so what will happen in mid-August when Dave's term expires is that there will no longer be a quorum on the NLRB, a movie we have seen. So there are as many episodes of that as there are of the Fast and Furious movie franchise. I don't know, we're up to 10, 11, 12. We've seen this movie before, and when there's no quorum, the board cannot act. And so the business community is all in an uproar, or at least they are in the press, that there won't be a quorum that can act to overturn all the good pro-worker Biden-era precedents. And they're putting a little pressure on the White House because they're worried about Dave's seat being open in mid-August. Now, let me just add one other point to that. It's perfectly unclear to me that Donald Trump will ever appoint a Democrat to serve on the NLRB, right? Particularly if the Supreme Court says he can fire anybody he would like, and it looks like that's the direction, fire any independent agency board member that he would like, and that seems to be the direction that the Supreme Court is going in. I don't know why he would appoint a Democrat, right? There's nothing in the statute that requires that you appoint a Democrat. There is a long time, I think it's a tradition or sort of a norm, that you have 3 members of the majority party and 3 members of the president's party, 2 members of the out party. But I don't know that that's a requirement anywhere in the law. Again, I may be wrong about that. Ruben, correct me.
We know how this president feels about norms, right? So.
Yes, he doesn't like any norms. No norms apply to him. So I just think it's entirely possible that we end up with 5 Republican board members if the White House can get its act together. Now, if there's a Democratic majority in the Senate, they would not confirm that many. They might not confirm any going forward unless Democrats get their seats as well, and they might force an even Steven distribution on the board. We'll have to see how that plays out. So there's lots of contingencies there, but it'll be interesting to see. Okay, we have another question from our audience. I don't think we have anything coming in from our live audience, but here's from our community. Ali, this is picking up. Somebody was really prescient and knew that you were going to talk about this topic. So here's the question. It feels like we are in an economy right now with very few new jobs, unemployment that's not changing, shrinking wage hikes, and rising inflation. All things that you just talked about with us, Ali. So you can start us off. In the 1970s, we talked about stagflation. And stagflation, just to remind everybody, is rising inflation and rising unemployment at the same time. What should we call, the question is, what should we call today's economy? And do we think it might get better anytime soon? Now, you addressed some of that, but I'd like you to continue. First of all, we need this. The audience member is inviting you to undertake a branding exercise. What should we call the labor market and the economy that we have now? Because it's not really stagflation yet.
No, it really isn't yet, and I think it's not sexy, but we're in a low growth economy. It's really what it essentially is. We're stagnant, for the lack of a better word. That being said, what my concern is though is that the inflation element to make that stagflation formula come together, that might not be very far away with this Iran war. And so that's really my concern, where it's, we're in a stagnant economy. Part of that stagnation means that there's just not enough economic demand coming from either consumers or from the business community. And so that's really, the saving grace that is actually keeping prices relatively dampened right now. And we're not necessarily seeing high levels of inflation. But again, it's these global economic shocks that we've experienced already over the past few years, with not just with COVID, but obviously with Russia's invasion of Ukraine and what that did to energy prices. We feel that as an economy. And so we're really not that far removed from the stagflation element that again, we haven't experienced in several decades. But right now we are just really a stagnant economy. And I think, again, coast to coast, people are feeling it.
Yeah. So the last part of the question was, do we think it might get better anytime soon?
Yeah, my hope is that at the very least it doesn't get worse, because that's really the direction we're trending. If the one key element that is really different now than in the 1970s is really the aging dynamics that I mentioned that have really caused this kind of structural need for a very big and growing healthcare sector. That's really what has kept our economy afloat, preventing, again, high levels of unemployment over the past year and a half or so. How long can we ride that out? It remains to be seen. But the fact that we've been able to do that for about a year and a half now, it's really promising that we can kind of sustain this low growth economy. That being said, again, we're just one economic shock away from what would be a potential economic catastrophe. And so I hope that doesn't happen. Cooler heads prevail in terms of international conflict and what that looks like over the next couple of months. But at the very least, it looks like a continuation of the stagnant growth that we've had for the past year and a half.
Yeah, McKenna or Ruben, do you want to jump in on this economics question?
McKenna?
I don't think I have anything to add. I think I appreciate Ali's explanation.
Yeah, so I do as well. I'm sorry, go ahead, Ruben.
No, I just think it's very interesting differences from the 1970s, maybe similarities from the 1970s in terms of the effect on incumbents, in terms of the introduction of technology, whether that smooths or exacerbates the potential ill effects, the change in the global oil market. I mean, I'm not versed in all of these things, but it seems like there are some big differences, and also just the question of the information ecosystem about whether people think that things are really still okay, or that and whether it's going to have an impact on wage growth, and also, as I said in my other comments, like legislation to deal with higher prices, whether it be wage increases or a different price regulation. So a lot different than the 1970s, but hey, maybe there will be some similarities as well.
Yeah. Here's the only thing that I would add in, and I agreeing with everything Ellie said, but I want to take a slightly different perspective on it. One of the things that is saving us is that there is a lot of uncertainty among employers and also consumers about the policy environment in which the world is operating. That's not how ordinary people think about it. It's not even how ordinary business people think about it. But the tariffs were on, the tariffs were off, the tariffs were not as big, the tariffs got struck down by the Supreme Court, there is new tariffs on. There's a Russia invades Ukraine, we find other oil sources, now we have the Iran war. Oil prices are going up, gas prices are going up, they're stabilizing, oil prices are going down, they're going back up again because no Trump administration policy seems to hang around for more than 15 minutes. And as a consequence of that, it's very hard for people to make decisions, right? In a context where you don't know what the economy is going to do next. Do I need more production? Do I need less production? Do I need more people at my service counter or fewer people at my service counter? When you don't know, it's very hard to make choices. And so as a general matter, employers try to minimize risk. And also they try to minimize the risk that they know best. And the risk that employers know best right now is from their experience with the pandemic, where they lost a lot of workers and it cost them a mountain of money to find new workers. It just took a very long time. Let me also say they had the same experience with supply chains. And so there is sort of I'm going to try to coin a phrase here, I'm going to do a really bad job, sort of a favorable or beneficial inertia, right? Everybody is sort of waiting to see what's going to happen. And they know that 15 minutes from now, we could be in a totally different world and then it could come back again. And so they sort of don't know how to think about the state of the economy so that they can plan. And capitalism depends very heavily on planning. Right? So what I said before to Ali when he talked about the economy was I'm very worried about whether or not employers start saying, you know what, we're not going to need a lot more production in the future. We're going to need less because we think the economy's turning down in the way that Ali is talking about. So we're going to start laying people off. Well, that could be the trigger that really dramatically slows things down. And let me just say, if you look at consumer sentiment, consumers are in a horrible mood. And the idea that they're going to keep spending money, particularly with gas prices up and real wages, the increases in real wages sinking, actually real wages are sinking. Or beginning to aim towards sinking, I should say. I think that could be the trigger. So if people think that oil prices and gas prices are going to stay high through the end of the year, and the President of the United States said that's what's going to happen, by the midterm elections, he said gas prices may not have come down. Well, if that's the horizon, and people are looking over the next 2 or 3 quarters and saying, hey, oil price, maybe we need to start saving some money, laying some people off, stop spending our money, stop buying new plant and equipment, stop investing in R&D. That's when that very negative spiral that Ali was just talking about could happen. And I don't know when that happens. There's still a lot of rich people spending huge amounts of money, right? We have a K-shaped economy. The top half of that K, people are spending like crazy now. That's what's propping up our economy. But, if gas prices and oil prices stay up, maybe that doesn't continue. So, boy, oh boy, we had this really uplifting story from McKenna to end the main show. And I feel like I'm just telling everybody, run for your lives, get into your bunkers and start opening canned foods. That's not what we're saying, but there's a lot to be worried about. Okay, I don't think we do not have any more questions, so I'm going to call overtime to an end. Hey, audience, thank you for sticking with us through overtime. We really appreciate it. We will see you again in 2 weeks, Tuesday, April 28th. at noon right here on LinkedIn. We'll be live, and then we'll publish it for posterity on poweratwork.us. Thanks, McKenna. Thank you, Ali. Thank you, Ruben. Look forward to seeing you all again really soon. Thanks.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Are you looking for more labor radio shows and podcasts? Well, look no further. Go to the Labor Radio Podcast Network. The network connects more than 200 radio shows and podcasts. To find more great labor content, go to www.laborradionetwork.org. Power at Work is there. You should be too.